Okay, this exercise is going to cover type styles. It's going to be a quick exercise because we're not going to have to recreate each page. We're going to create our first layout and then we'll duplicate it as we apply different paragraph and character styles to each of our pages and columns. So what we'll do, let's set up our new document, File, New Document. And our pages are going to be 10 inches by 10 inches. So in the preset details here, you can change those units if you'd like to 10 inches by 10 inches. I'm going to change the number of pages to 1. Make sure that facing pages is deselected. And then as I scroll further down, I'm going to expand the margin settings. And I'm just going to take a look at these margins. Now, because I just did the previous exercise in InDesign, my margins are already set. We want 2.5 inches from the top, and then 2 inches on the remaining 3 sides. To unlink all margins, you have to break the link using the icon on the right here. If we want to see what the page is going to look like, make sure Preview is selected. Okay, so we can see we have a square page, we have a rectangular margin on the inside. Okay, we'll say Create, and this is the page that we'll be dealing with. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating my first column, and I'll create my first column by using a text box. So I'll take my type tool, and I'm going to create a column that looks like this. So just hold your mouse down and drag across. Now, right now, my cursor's inside of it, but I'm going to go back to my toolbar and use my selection tool so that this new text frame is selected, and I can see the transform feature in my properties window over here on the right. Again, if you have an earlier version, you'll see your transform properties, which are the X, Y, W, H. You'll see those in your control panel. Okay, so if we look at our controls here, they're in the upper left corner of our screen, far left side of our control panel. Okay, I'm doing this because I want to type in the width of the column. I already know what width I want to be working with. I want the width of this column to be 2.5 inches. So I'll type that in, press return, it'll resize it, and then I'll take this selection tool and just line it up to this left margin, if I can get that perfect. Okay, line it up to the left margin, and I'll just make it a little bit taller. Okay. And we will be setting up 2 titles and a paragraph. And in the previous exercise, we did that by creating a separate text frame for each display type and then a text frame for our content. But I did want to show you how to create this using your character settings and only one text frame, just to give you guys an idea of how to work with one text frame. Okay. Before we get started, let's set up the same guides that we used in the previous exercise. So I'm going to drag from my ruler, place one guide here at the top margin, another guide 1 inch down, which is 72 points down, and then one more inch or 72 points further. And I'm just using my ruler here to gauge. By the way, notice when I'm dragging, because I have my smart guides on, it's giving me my X and Y, which makes sure that I'm pretty accurate. Okay, so I have my 3 guides, and we're going to have our display type and the first row of our paragraph. They're going to all be sitting along these lines. Okay. All right, so I'll take my type tool. I'll click here, and I'm going to type out an alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. It's good enough for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this text, and I'm going to change it to be 30. Okay, and then I'm just going to nudge this down so that the baseline of this text sits along this first guide that I've created. Now we're going to be working with the typeface Garamond, so I'll again highlight this text and change this to Adobe Garamond Pro, and I'll see what I can add here. Then I'll press return to create a new paragraph, and this new paragraph is going to be labeling our styles. So the style this paragraph is going to be illustrating is italic. So I'll type that word out, then I'll select that word, and I'm going to change these character settings to be italic, and I'll change the type size to be 11. And then last but not least, I'll change my leading to be 72. Okay, notice it jumps right down to that next guide. And I'm sorry, I think I changed this to be italic. It needs to be bold. So all of our labels for each column are going to be bold. Okay, I'll press return to create my next paragraph. And because I set my leading to 72, it jumps down to the next frame. Now I've already copied my text. Okay, so I've already copied my text from the exercise. Notice when I paste it, it's pasting it into the settings that I've already created, so that 72 point. That's not really going to work for us. We want this text to be, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. We want this text to be not 72 points for the leading, okay? So what we'll do is we will select this paragraph, and we're going to bring that leading back to 13. Okay, this is when it gets tricky, right? Because leading is this kind of space in between text. So you're going to see the difficulty with working with some of this, right? So I'm having trouble kind of highlighting everything, bringing that text down, right? So this is when you might ask yourself, maybe it would make more sense to just create a text frame that contains this new content, and when you paste it, you don't have to worry about that leading, right? You don't have to worry about that spacing. So that's what I'm going to do. I just wanted to show you guys that complicated problem with pasting and using these larger leading standards for a paragraph when you already have kind of a limited space. So what I'll do is I'll take this new text frame, and again, this text was just copied from the assignment. So if you don't have it copied yet, just go over to Canvas. The paragraph on Garamond is right there that you can copy. You just paste it with Command V. And in this new text frame, I'll just select all. Command A is a shortcut key. And I'll apply my text frame. I will apply Garamond to this. Make sure that it is italic. The size is going to be 11, and the leading is going to be 13. And these are the settings that we'll be using for the entire document. Okay, so I've applied italics to my paragraph here, but I haven't applied it to this first display type. So I'll select this top display type, and again, I'll be applying a style, italic, to this, and then I'll see if I can add any additional letters to that row. I can add an N. Okay, so this is what italic looks like. On the right side, we're going to compare our italic to something called bold. So I'm going to take my selection tool, hold Shift and select both of these text frames that we're working with here, and I'm going to duplicate them. Now I'm going to duplicate these using my Option key, but you could duplicate them using Command C, Command V, or on a PC it would be Control C, Control V, and then just dragging it with your selection tool into place. So this right column here is going to be bold. So I'll just change the descriptor. I'll select my type, display type here, navigate to my character window and change the style to bold. Notice when I change it to bold, several letters cannot fit on that single row. So what I'll do is I'll just delete these letters until we get to a point where everything fits on this row. I'll navigate now down to the paragraph using my type tool. Just click in here. Command A or Control A will select all, and we're only applying a change of style. So we're changing this to bold. Okay, and to give you an idea of what we're going to be looking at is we're looking at styles and how these impact the way letters look on the page. So the left column we have italic. Notice italic has slanted strokes. It allows our letters to be somewhat condensed across rows, and it has a lighter appearance overall if we're thinking about black lettering on a white background. A lighter appearance than we will see with bold. So with bold, the letters have a lot more shape to them, or weight is what we would call it. The letters also need a little more horizontal space, so you can't fit as many letters on a row as you can with italic. And because of this, it also impacts the length of our paragraphs. So notice the italics, because the lettering is closer together, it is lighter in weight, the paragraph is shorter. If we look at bold, the letters are heavier, they take up more space, and therefore the paragraphs end up being longer. Now the last thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry about that. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we do want to apply a paragraph style to these text frames. So I'm going to take my selection tool and I'm just going to select both of these text frames with my paragraphs in them. And in my properties panel here, I do have a paragraph setting option for alignment. And by default it's usually left aligned, but what we'll choose now is justify with the last line aligned left. So that's the fourth icon in this row of paragraph icons. Again, if you have your older version of InDesign, what you need to do if you're just using a selection tool, when you have text frames selected, go over to your type tool, just click on that, and if you select your paragraph icon, it will give you your paragraph icons right here. Okay, paragraph alignment icons, I should say. So here you can change it. So you're not limited if you don't have this properties window. Just remember, you can find it in your controls. You just have to know you have to go to your type tool to see your paragraph and character styles. Okay, so now we have our first page layout, and what we're going to be doing is just duplicating this. That will make our lives easier and it's really important that you remember you can always duplicate something you've been working on and apply new styles to it. So I'm going to go to my Pages window, which is a tab that most likely is right behind your Properties window. If it's not, remember that you can go to your window menu, and if you're looking for Pages, just select this and it'll bring the Pages window forward. Okay, I have page 1 selected. That's the one I'd like to duplicate. So I'll now go up to the menu in the upper right corner of my Pages window, click on that menu, and I'm going to select Duplicate Spread. Perfect. And we have page 2 now. Now page 2 is going to be a comparison of all caps and something called small caps. So the first thing that we want to do, I'll bring my properties window back up here. The first thing we're going to want to do is change our label so we remember what we're working on. And I'll select my display type first. And over here I'm going to turn my display type just to regular instead of italic. and then I might have to delete one or two letters so that it all sits on a single row. I'll do the same thing for the right column. I'm going to change my style back to regular. Okay, and then you may be able to add a letter. We just want to fill in that 2.5-inch space for our columns. I'll do the same thing for my paragraphs. So I'm going to select this paragraph, or you could even select the entire text frame, change it to regular, here, regular. And again, you could do that with text frames or having a cursor and selecting all of the text inside of it. Okay, so our settings right now for our type styles are currently regular Garamond. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to caps on the left side. So I'll highlight my display type, and you can find your cap settings in your properties panel. It's underneath your character window. In your control panel, you'll just see some little T's after all of your character settings. So the icons for caps, superscript, subscript, etc. They're these icons with little T's. Okay, so for all caps, it's the first icon with 2 uppercase T's. Okay, I'll click on that. Notice it makes the letters much bigger. So I'm just going to delete the letters until they all fit on a row here. And then I'll select this paragraph and apply all caps to that paragraph. Okay, now when I do add caps to this paragraph, something interesting happens. We get this little red plus sign. What that's indicating is that our text is actually longer than the text frame allows. It's called overset text, which you've maybe seen before when you're exporting a PDF and InDesign gives you a warning. Okay, it's not a big deal, but it means that we're not seeing all of our text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the length of my text frame downward so that we can see all the text. Alright, so that's what caps looks like with no other settings applied. And on the right side, what we're going to apply is something called small caps. So keeping that display type highlighted, I'm going to select this second icon here, which are still 2 uppercase T's, but the T on the left is larger and the T on the right is smaller. So hence the term small caps. Small caps sort of resembles uppercase, lowercase, if that's what you're used to. Okay, kind of resembles uppercase, lowercase, right? Because the capital letter at the beginning of a sentence will be larger than the rest of the capital letters. So our capital letters in small caps are essentially the height of our lowercase letters for that typeface that you're working with. Okay, now I'm going to apply this setting to this paragraph down here as well. So I'll select that text frame, click on the small caps icon, and we can see what happens here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here so we can take a look. So notice on the left side where we have regular caps, what happens is because the letters become both taller and wider, it feels as though there's not as much space between our lines as we're seeing on the right side with our small caps. Because small caps, the letters are capitalized, but they're smaller, sort of similar to lowercase letters, we have visually more space in between the baseline of our lines and the top of many of our letters. So it feels more spacious, and what that does is it makes it more legible. So keep in mind that these are options, and it's important to look at them because sometimes you will want all caps, but if you use regular caps, you may run into some problems if you're dealing with a long paragraph like what we're dealing with here, right? On the left side, that long paragraph with all caps is actually sort of difficult to read. And not only that, it's taking up a lot more space on the page, so that can create problems in and of itself when you're dealing with a limited layout. Okay, so caps and small caps, and now you sort of know where the icons are, not just for uppercase, lowercase, or large caps, small caps, but this is also where superscript, subscript, underlining, and strike through can be found. So hopefully just by seeing where those icons are, that sort of educates you a little bit more in the InDesign space. So now that we have this done, we're going to create another page, and again we're going to simply duplicate our spread. So I'm going to keep page 2 selected. In my Pages window, when I go to the upper right corner where my menu is, I'll click on this and select Duplicate Spread, and it will create a duplicate at the bottom of my document. So now I have a page 3, and page 3 is just going to explore tight letter spacing and loose letter spacing. Okay, we're going to want to turn off the settings that we just created, so I'm just going to turn off the caps and the small caps, and I'm just doing this by selecting my text that I want to work with. So again, just deselecting all caps or small caps, and now we're dealing with columns that have the same settings. Okay, so on both the left and right side I'm seeing regular Garamond, and we can apply new settings here. Now the settings for this one are going to have to do with spacing, so I'm just going to change the labels again so we can remember. And I'm just labeling these tight letter spacing or wide or loose letter spacing. I believe the exercise might use slightly different verbiage, but it's okay. You can just label this so you know what you're looking at. Letter spacing has to do with some settings in our character window, and specifically we're going to be dealing with something called tracking. So having my display type selected, I'm going to go find my tracking settings, and within your character window, it's defined through the icon that has a V and an A on it with a white background. Okay, by default our letter spacing is set to 0. So for tight letter spacing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this down arrow, and I'm going to change my letter spacing to be -50. Okay, and I'm going to type out a few more letters here so it fills in that text frame or that row. And then for the second paragraph here, I'm going to be changing this to -50. Again, using that tracking option here. VA with the white background is tracking. And normally you can hover over these icons and it'll give you a little hint. Okay. For wide letter spacing, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to select this display typeface and increase using that up arrow to 50. Okay, and then again taking this paragraph here, increasing to 50, and we can see what's happening. Right? So you can see almost immediately what's going on with the letter spacing. We're creating space using tracking space between our letters and also between the words. So there's a relationship there in how the typeface was designed, so that even as you're stretching out the space in between your words, you're also stretching out the space in between each letter. Okay? Tight letter spacing, if you need to fit something in, or let's say you have one of these justified paragraphs and it has some strange, spaces in it, maybe you go in and sort of play with some of the tracking. We also have something called kerning. We're not going to deal with that today, but kerning will allow you to adjust the space between just 2 letters or 2 characters. So that's something worth noting too if you're working with something really specific and you want it to look perfect. But with tracking, you might want to use this if you need a little space, if you need to adjust some of the spacing that you're seeing in a justified paragraph, or if you just want to be slightly more legible. Sometimes just a little bit of widening of your tracking, that will make it a little bit easier, but the further you go beyond 0, the less legible it gets. So if it gets too wide, right, I'll just just to take this to the extreme, if it gets too wide, it gets harder to read. So when we're looking at this page right now, as I've zoomed in here, I have tracking at 200 on the right here, and on the left it's at -50. So even though -50 is really tight letter spacing and it's not perfect because the letters are starting to sort of merge together, on the right it's getting very difficult to read. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. And sometimes that can be really fun to have things that are difficult to read, but other times it's really something to keep in mind. If you want people to read a long paragraph, you want to make it as easy as possible to navigate it. Okay, but that's what tight and loose letter spacing looks like. Again, we're dealing with tracking in your character window. All right, the last page that we'll be creating is just going to show you how to find old style numbers. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this third page again. I'll go into my Pages window, find the menu in the upper right corner, select Duplicate Spread. That will give us a duplicate, so we're working on page 4 now. And I'll just reset all of my properties for tracking back to 0. So I'll select all of these text frames to save me a little time. Remember to select multiple frames at once. Just use your selection tool, which is the black arrow from your toolbar. Hold Shift and you can select multiple items. And what we're going to do here, I'm not sure. There we go. We're going to relabel this. So instead of tight letter spacing, on the left we're going to say regular, and on the right we're going to say old style. Okay, and then instead of the alphabet, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, do the same thing here. Okay, looks pretty good. Okay, so we're actually not going to make changes to that left column. We're just going to make changes to the right column for comparison. So I'm going to select this display type. And what we'll do, by the way, it's important that you select it with your text tool or type tool, because if you use your selection tool, you're going to get a different menu. Okay, so we want to make sure we've highlighted the text with our type tool. Then we're going to go to the far upper right corner of our InDesign workspace. There's a lightning bolt, a little wheel, and then a hamburger menu. We are going to be clicking on the hamburger menu here. And we're going to find the first option, which is Open Type. And in the flyout menu at the bottom, we have Proportional Old Style. We also have something called Tabular Old Style. These only impact numbers, okay? So I'm going to select Proportional Old Style to show you what that looks like. Okay, just to give you guys an idea. I'll bring these guides back into view as well so you can see that. Okay, so you can see what's happening here with the old style. It's starting to drop in some of these numbers. It drops below our baseline. And then I'll show you this other option. So instead of proportional old style, tabular old style. And you can see it's almost the same. The scale's a little bit different with the spacing. Okay, but these are called old style for a reason. They tend to reference older letterpress values. The regular on the left is more a typeface that you would want on a computer because you want things to fit into a grid. Okay, now if I apply this to my paragraph, you won't really see much of a difference because actually there's only one place where there's a number here. So 16th century, you can see it changes the proportions of the 1 to the 6 versus over here where they are the same height. Okay. All right, so this is just, one of those features that's good to know if you ever see something in a layout that you're trying to replicate or you're trying to duplicate something that looks like a period piece. you need to know where these settings are. Okay. All right, so these are type styles, right? Old style is the style of the numbers, right? Or the style of the symbols. When we're talking about letter spacing, it's less of a style, but it impacts the way that the letters, the words, and the paragraphs are related to one another and related to the page, right? If we look at the tight letter spacing, we're dealing with a heavier paragraph. We're dealing with letters that start to merge together. Wide spacing is going to feel like the paragraph's a little bit lighter in weight. It's going to take up a little bit more space, and that can be both good and bad depending on the legibility. Caps and small caps, it's a different style of the same Garamond typeface, right? So regular caps means every single letter is going to be the same height. It's all going to be presented as capital letters. What this means is if you have the same leading as regular text, it's going to feel, caps are always going to feel like there's less space between the lines until you go in there and make changes to your leading or your line height. Small caps is going to feel more natural. It's easier to read because we do still have capital letters defining proper nouns, defining the beginning of a sentence. That's really helpful with our eyes. So small caps tend to be more legible, and I would recommend that you use small caps if you're having to deal with actual lengthy paragraphs that someone may have to read. All caps, on the other hand, they're great for titles or display text, but it's not so great for a full paragraph. Okay, and then back to the beginning, italic and bold. Again, italic's always going to feel a little bit lighter. It's got the diagonal strokes, and that allows our letters to nest a little bit closer next to one another. And compared to bold, it's going to take up less space on the page. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas, just getting you familiar with some of these type styles, but also, again, we're sort of warming up in InDesign, getting used to some of our settings, and also getting used to layout, right? We use this two-column layout, which is a very traditional layout in this document. Consider it in future assignments that you could utilize a two-column page design, and think about how you can sort of take advantage of that option, but also how you can use margins to create a really clean, neat page design. Okay, once you're done with this, we're going to save it as a PDF. I always save it as press quality. Put your last name in the title and submit it to Canvas.